Welcome back, everyone. The 9th feature session on ports, an opportunity to harmonize sustainable development of land and sea, is co-hosted by Yonsei University and Incheon Port Authority. I will introduce to you our own professor, Kim Hyun-jung, a professor of Department of Political Science and International Studies, who will be moderating this session. Good afternoon, Professor Kim.
안녕하세요. Good morning and good afternoon. I'd like to welcome you to the featured and scientific session 9 of GEEF 2022. In this session, and as this is co-hosted by Yonsei University and Incheon Port Authority, we're going to be discussing the role of ports as an opportunity to harmonize sustainable development of land and sea. I am a scholar that studies international laws on sea and maritime affairs, and we need to protect marine resources, and this is related to SDG number 14 of the UN. So it is my pleasure to be moderating the session. You may think that the seas are out and far away from us, but the oceans take up more than 2/3 of the surface of the earth, and the oceans are supporting our ecosystems and our livelihoods. According to the SDG site, more than 3 billion people around the world are dependent on marine resources, and also the oceans absorb a lot of CO2. And at the same time, marine ecosystems are suffering from wastes dumped by the people. When you look at SDG number 14, which is about sustainable marine resources and ecosystem, this is all the more important and meaningful. Therefore, in order to achieve SDG 14, we need to utilize ports. So this is the topic of the session. Ports are located in places where they connect between oceans and land. Therefore, ports can provide an opportunity to harmonize sustainable development of land and sea. There are many ports around the world, and when ports and their authorities come together and discuss how to promote sustainable development, it's going to be very meaningful. In this regard, we have 3 presenters and 2 panel members joining us for the session. I'd like to give each presenter 20 minutes. I'd like to introduce the first presenter, who is Vice President Jong-Gil Kim of Incheon Port Authority. Since June 2021, he's been serving as Vice President of Incheon Port Authority, and he also received a PhD in Logistics Management from Graduate School of Logistics in Northeast Asia. And he's been Executive Director of Korea Society of Supply Chain Management since January 2016. And he is going to be talking about fine dust and air pollution as well as waste management. Please go ahead.
Good afternoon. As have been introduced, I am Kim Jong-Gil, Vice President of Incheon Port Authority. First of all, I would like to express my appreciation for this invitation to GEEF 2022. I would like to take this opportunity to share with you my experience on site, in particular, creating a sustainable green port centered around Incheon Port's activities for the mitigation of fine particles and microplastic. I will be presenting in the following order. For those of you who are not familiar with our port, let me introduce our port to you. Then I would like to talk to you about our measures to reduce fine particles and microplastic. This is the introduction of our authority. We were established in July of 2005. The first port authority was established in Busan in 2004, followed by Ulsan, Gwangyang, and therefore currently there are 4 port authorities in Korea. We work on development of the ports as well as the infrastructure surrounding the port, and we also work on recruiting international companies. We also have a role in managing and operating the port itself. Incheon is located close to the capital area, And as it is the gate into the largest economic zone in Korea, we have a large amount of traffic and freight going through our port. Let me introduce our port to you. We have generations 1, 2, 3. And here you can see our inner port. That is our oldest port. In history classes, you probably heard about the Ganghwa-do Treaty signed in the 1800s, and there are two conditions that were signed through that treaty. One is opening a port on the northern side and one on the southern side, and that is why we opened the Incheon port and the Wonsan port in South Korea and North Korea. And so after signing the Ganghwa-do Treaty, we developed this port, and that is when we opened the Incheon port. The fact that we opened this port means that it becomes a port for trade. So we only had the inner port during the first generation, and in 92, after signing diplomatic relations with China, we have seen a surge in trade between South Korea and China. And as you're well aware, many freight companies are trying to reach an economy of scale by utilizing the new Incheon port. This port was opened in 2015, and we are looking to open additional ports in the area. Let's take a look at our measures to mitigate fine particles. As you're well aware, we are not an expert in environmental areas, but we are well aware that when we divide or classify fine particles, we can utilize size. So we actually have measures to reduce the emission of fine particles under the size of 2.5 micrometers. Here you can see that when ships come into the port, we have a tugboat that meets the ship and tugs it to the port, and that is when the ship reaches the dock and conducts the unloading. Then they would go through the gate and go all the way to the actual area where the freight is expected. Here you can see a diagram of imports, and if you go the other way, that would be the flow for exports. And so you can see that until the loading and unloading, that is the activities that happens on the sea. And then after loading or unloading, that is the area on land. The largest amount of emissions comes from the ships itself, as well as the necessary land vehicles. There are different researches that give different numbers, but 65% of the emissions come from the ships themselves. So you can see that emissions come mainly from the ships, such as sulfur oxides and nitrogen oxides. And on land, landing, loading, and unloading equipment, as well as freight vehicles moving the freight to the destination, has large amounts of emissions as well. So here you can see that depending on the pollution source, we provide AMP, which I will explain later, and also support for outdated freight vehicles. For the equipment of loading and unloading, we also try to provide green equipment, which I will also explain later on in my presentation. So, ships, vehicles, and equipment for loading and unloading are the three parts that I will focus on in talking about reducing fine particles. Here you can see the part about ships. There is an area called ECA, and so this is an area that is designated, as you can see in the map. So we have different zoning, and if ships were to come into the ECA zone, then the amount of sulfur oxides that are allowed is 0.1%, whereas the same amount is 0.5% in open sea. We also install scrubbers on the ships to reduce sulfur oxides. Well, urinal sources became quite an issue last year, and that is why we need to find solutions to reduce the emission of sulfur oxide by using such solutions or installing equipment such as scrubbers. We also have a low-speed operation program. So when the boats and ships come into the harbor or the port, the vessels need to limit their speed to 14 knots. And if you travel at a speed that is higher than 14 knots, then you will be charged with a punitive fine. But within the inner areas of the port, semi-container ships are limited to 10 knots, and car carriers are limited to 12 knots. And so that is actually less than the 14 knots. And if you keep your vessels at this low speed, then we will actually provide a waiver of up to 30% for the clearance fees. Many are taking advantage of this incentive. We also have the Alternative Marine Power Supply, or AMP. When ships come into the port, then most of the ships at anchor use diesel fuels, which then emit sulfur oxide and nitrogen oxide, as well as fine particles. And so that is why we are providing AMP, so that the ships at anchor will not need to utilize their diesel engines to generate their own electricity, but rather just plug into our AMP for electricity. This will reduce the emissions of fine particles as well as sulfur oxide and nitrogen oxide. The ships that you see here are the ships that have been built on contract. So when ships come into the port, they turn off their engine, and tugboats would bring them to the dock. That process actually produces quite a significant amount of sulfur oxide, nitrogen oxide, and fine particles. But if we use LNG-powered ships, then that will actually reduce considerable amount of nitrogen oxide as well as 100% sulfur oxide. And that is why last year we built the LNG-powered ships. And this year we will continue to add to our fleet. We have the world's second LNG-powered tugboats in our port. The first boat was introduced by Norway. And here we have the part on vehicles. As you're well aware, most freight vehicles use diesel. Some of the newer models use other solutions to lower pollutions. Ever since 2015 to 2016, we have had yard treatment for the vehicles, but for the cars that were produced before that, they all use diesel without treatment. And so for these outdated vehicles, we provide guidance to them. So especially the vehicles that were produced before the end of 2005 are not allowed to come into the port facilities in order to minimize the emission of pollutants. The yard tractors are installed with DPF, And if we install DPF to 7 more yard trackers in Incheon, then we will have the complete fleet installed with DPF. At the Incheon port, we have the highest rate of transition of these yard tractors compared to any other ports in Korea. We also have seasonal management of fine particles because we do have specific seasons where we have a high concentration of fine particles. I'm sure that you receive early warnings through your cell phones. And that is why we have a seasonal management period from December to March. And during this season, we have the participation of various ships and vehicles. And if they participate in our seasonal management system, then we will be providing incentives to these ships and vehicles so that we can work together to reduce the fine particles in the air. Here you can see indoor air quality. Within our port, we also have ships going all the way to Jeju Island or the islands off the western coast of Korea. These are called coastal terminals. And we also have passenger terminals that send ships to 10 Chinese cities. We also have cruise ship terminals. And for these terminals, we have a high concentration of passengers. And so we have a very strict management of the indoor air quality at these passenger terminals, which is at a very higher level compared to what is mandated by law. Microplastics was not something that I was well aware of, but 96.3% of the microplastic at sea do come from land. Microplastic can be divided into primary or secondary microplastic. Primary microplastic means microplastics that were produced at that size during production. And secondary means that a larger piece of plastic have been broken down into the size of smaller plastic pieces such as microplastics. We do have a day to purify the sea every year, and within our Incheon Port Authority, we started to use biodegradable plastic cups. And on the bottom, you can see our circle, which is Sea Recycling Miracle brought into a single brand. And using this brand, we have various PR activities. We also have an R&D department within the Incheon Port Authority, and through this R&D center, we work with SMEs. Well, when ships dock, then because the side of the ship is made from metal, there could be friction and tears, and that is why we are using facilities such as very hard rubber to provide a buffer. These types of rubber products were thrown away after use, but now we are working with SMEs so that we can recycle this rubber. And last year, we have actually applied for a patent. And we are also utilizing eco-friendly materials for our roads within the port. And so you can see that we are working on recycling as much material as possible. So all of the roads at our port are covered with recycled materials. I did try to go as quickly as possible due to the time constraint. I hope that you found the information useful. I don't know if I have presented everything that you already knew, but thank you very much for your attention. If you do have any questions, please state your questions during the Q&A session. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Vice President Kim.
So during the activities on sea and on land. You have tried to find various ways to reduce fine particles as well as emissions. And you have also talked about circle as well as your activities to utilize recycled materials. And I look forward to learning more about your activities.
I'd like to introduce the second presenter, who is Professor Taedong Lee of the Department of Political Science and International Studies at Yonsei University. He is interested in researching global and subnational environmental politics and policy, and he's also Underwood Distinguished Professor and Chair Professor at the Department of Political Science and International Relations. He's going to be discussing global networks for sustainable ports. So, Professor Lee, please go ahead. Hello, everyone. As introduced, I am Lee Taedong, Professor at the Political Science Department at Yonsei University. Today, in my presentation, I'm going to be introducing the global networks for sustainable ports because I conduct research on climate and environmental policies for cities and national states. And I study them in the context of international relations and international politics. In particular, in my presentation, I'm going to be focusing on the utilization of ports. Let me say the conclusion first. Ports are places where all the goods are passing through across the national boundaries. And the ports are part of a network. So these ports have created a network for climate change and climate response, so that many ports around the world can cooperate and can discuss various ways to contribute to climate responses. So they have developed the environmental ship index and onshore power supply. So these were some of the initiatives started by the network of ports. And Vice President Kim of Incheon Port Authority already gave a presentation on some of the details. And in my presentation, I'm going to be discussing various activities by individual ports as well as the network of ports. Ports are international hubs, and they hold significance for the global supply of goods and people. International ports are where materials and resources and people flow around. Therefore, ports are very important, and so the economic and social and environmental sustainability of the ports is crucial. When we discuss the economic aspects for ports, it means that the ports will be able to enjoy high returns on investment. And secondly, we need to ensure that the ports will continue to provide employment. And there are various facilities provided by the ports that are given to the companies. And such processes need to be done in a sustainable manner. Moving on to the social aspects. Ports are also part of the local communities where there are various stakeholders. And they may have different interests and different value systems. So it is necessary to coordinate and harmonize different interests and different values of the stakeholders surrounding the ports. Finally, there are environmental aspects we need to consider. There are many economic activities being held at the ports, and many environmental factors need to be considered, including noise levels, waste, and air pollution. So these are some of the aspects we need to manage from the environmental perspective. So when we discuss port sustainability, we need to approach this topic from the three pillars of economic, social, and environmental aspects. And in my presentation, I'm going to be focusing more on the environmental aspects. Now, when you look at the environmental aspects of the port management, you can look at them from the external management and internal management perspectives. As we all know, ports are interconnected. So we not only need to manage the ports internally, but also we need to manage ports from the external perspective. There are various topics and targets that need to be managed, and these should be shared among the ports. So that's the external management side. And as Vice President Kim explained in detail, we also need to pay attention to the internal management of the ports by pursuing optimization. Then, how can we ensure environmental sustainability in ports? This is a very important question, and one of the important objectives is to reduce air pollution and reduce the production of NOx and SOx, and also reduce marine waste. So that's number one objective. And secondly, we should be able to contribute to climate response by managing our ports in a sustainable manner. And to do so, we need to change and improve our practices. We need to build up infrastructure to guarantee environmental sustainability of ports. And to do so, we need to engage various stakeholders. But ports do not stand alone. They do not operate on their own. They coordinate and network with various ports around the world. So networking is an opportunity for reference check and also for comparison. So the World Ports Climate Initiative is one of such examples of port networks. There are many ports around the world, and when it comes to port sustainability, and especially environmental sustainability, there are various kinds of networks. There's eco-ports as part of ICPA, and the World Ports Climate Declaration and World Ports Climate Initiative are some of the examples. And in my presentation, I'm going to be focusing more on the World Ports Climate Initiative and their declarations. I believe these are very important because these were not forced upon by any external authority, but rather these were voluntary initiatives. Ports and cities took the initiative, and they created this network. The World Ports Climate Declaration was initiated by the city of Rotterdam in Europe. It is one of the largest ports in Europe, and they declared that they are going to achieve climate mitigation of 50% by 2030. And then, with this declaration, other ports decided to follow the footsteps of Rotterdam, because when more and more ports participate in this initiative, there will be better effect. But at the same time, we not only need to promote environmental sustainability, but also economic sustainability and social sustainability. Here, as you can see, this initiative is based on the pledge that they will reduce climate emissions while not damaging the port's competitiveness. And there's a high level of collaboration with C40 and other institutions. What they are trying to achieve is, first of all, as was mentioned by the Incheon Port Authority, is to reduce CO2 emissions. Carbon emissions is a crucial issue for ports and the surrounding communities. Imagine that there's air pollution issue for residents that live near the port area. Then residents would not want to live around the port any longer. So CO2 emissions reduction is a critical mandate for the benefit of the local community. But in addition to that, we need to contribute to CO2 emissions reduction at the global level. Then how can they start reducing CO2 emissions? They can reduce carbon emissions from vessels and also from port operations, as was mentioned in the first presentation. And also they can reduce emissions from inland shipping. And in order to do so, they may explore the use of alternative fuels or low sulfur fuels, or they may install facilities to remove sulfur content from the fuels. So these are some of the initiatives you can implement. And here, the participants exchange information and disclose information in a transparent manner so that they can understand what activities are done by other ports. In order to implement these action items, they need to coordinate with various stakeholders, including the shipping companies, terminal operators, and fuel suppliers, as well as logistics providers. And also there are neighboring residents and environmental NGOs in the local communities. In addition, it does not just involve a single port, but other ports around the world. There is Professor David Vogel from Berkeley, and he mentioned the California effect. This means that the state of California has been pursuing various environmental regulations, and this California initiative was able to strengthen automobile regulations in other states. But at the same time, California purchases a lot of vehicles, and now because the strong regulations put in place in California, automobile manufacturers need to follow these very tight standards required by the Californian state government. So this is what is called the Californian effect. It really means that when there is a good set of regulations in one place, this will have positive impact on other areas or other places. For instance, AMP, this onshore power supply system is put in place in one port, as was mentioned by Mr. Kim. This AMP installation was done to ensure that vessels who are docked at the port will not generate air pollutants by using fossil fuels, such as diesel. Therefore, you need a power supply system not only on the ship but also at the port. But when one port does this and implements this initiative, then other ports may look at this case and follow the same measure. As a consequence, there will be more and more ports that will install the AMPs. And when the port authorities demand ships and vessels to have the facility for AMP, then they will have no choice but to follow this and change their practice and change their infrastructure. This really means that ports need to cooperate at the global level. In the past, these initiatives were pursued for the benefit of the local community to improve air quality in the surrounding areas, but now they are implementing these initiatives for global response to climate change. Then, what kinds of roles can be played by ports, and what do networks do in this regard? For instance, they take up voluntary measures to evaluate the level of sustainability for different ports in terms of SOx and NOx and air pollutants, and also for greenhouse gas emissions. The status of environmental pollution will be provided, and such information is available real time so that various stakeholders can access such information, and we can check how much they comply with the regulatory environmental regulations. Now, for this environmental ship index, out of 8,000 registered vessels, almost 7,000 valid scores have been accumulated. And so this means that the vessels are reporting on the environmental ship index. The next example is the onshore power supply. There are many sizes of vessels, but as for cruise ships, they need to be supplied with electricity at berth. But to provide electricity to cruise ships, if they continue to burn bunker C oil or other fossil fuels, then such vessels will continue to generate air pollution, which will affect people not only on the ship but also in the area. Therefore, we need to provide onshore power supply. Let's say that there is such onshore power supply at port A, while there's no such installation at port B, then there will be less incentive for ships and vessels to dock at port B, and they will rather go to port A. This is actually an example of peer pressure, and because ports are all interconnected, they can collaborate to increase the impact. And you can see that there are many participating ports for ESI. Here we have Busan and Ulsan joining this network. And there are many European countries and North American countries that are interested in this initiative. And as for the Long Beach Port Authority, where we will hear the next presentation, you can see that they are quite advanced in terms of the sustainability and sustainable management. They have wonderful best practices. So all in all, what I wanted to say in my presentation is that, first of all, ports are very important. We've put emphasis on the economic aspect of ports. Of course, ports contribute to economic development and trade. So because ports connect countries and they connect companies, and they support the logistical flow of goods and services and people. So ports are at the center of export and import. But in this process, they not only have economic contributions, but also social and environmental sustainability. These are the other aspects we need to consider. And to ensure sustainability, as you can see in these examples of Incheon Port Authority and other port cities, they need to be collaborating because ports do not operate on their own. They're all interconnected, and they need to cooperate and work together. And in this regard, regulatory coordination is crucial. And in addition, we need to learn and get information about what the other port authorities are doing so that we can support a better logistical flow and such shipping operations. And finally, we need to continue to promote learning and diffusion of best practices, and we need to share experiences and learn from one another. As I was listening to the presentation of Mr. Kim, I was able to learn that there were some very innovative initiatives. For instance, regarding fine matters, fine particles, and also microplastic waste management. If they come up with a good program, then this program can not only be implemented in Korea, but also in other countries. So I hope that Incheon Port Authority can be a leader and initiate such effort. Then such practices and such programs can be accepted or adopted by other ports, and as a result, there will be more diffusion of best practices around the world. And as I mentioned before, we need to do so because ports operate in a big network, and so they need to be part of this network. And in this network, we not only need to support the original functions and roles of the ports, providing shipping support and logistical flow. So we need to make sure that that happens, but at the same time, we need to cater to the social and environmental sustainability of the ports. Then this network of ports will be operating successfully and smoothly and will be able to support SDG implementation. Thank you. Professor Lee, thank you very much for your presentation. He discussed sustainable management of ports in terms of air pollution improvement and waste management, and also from the larger perspective, ports can contribute to responding to climate change. What was interesting was some of these initiatives led by the ports voluntarily, and she also mentioned that one port's experience can be shared and diffused with other ports around the world. And the Californian effect can be applied to the ports. So this is what I hope for. Thank you.
This is the last presentation for this session. We have Mr. Noel Hacegaba, who is the Deputy Executive Director for Chief Operating Professor of the Port of Long Beach, California. Currently, as I mentioned before, he is the Deputy Executive Director. Deputy Executive Director Hacegaba will talk to us about global port networks for sustainable development from a practical perspective. Let us listen to his presentation via the screen.
Greetings. Annyeonghaseyo. My name is Noel Hacegaba. I serve as Deputy Executive Director at the Port of Long Beach, located on the west coast of the United States. I want to begin by thanking you for the kind invitation to join this distinguished group of global leaders and experts. To all the organizers, congratulations on convening this excellent forum to address some of the most pressing and critical issues facing the global community. Your vision and leadership in organizing GEEF 2022 is highly commendable. I look forward to hearing from my colleagues and learning from their presentations. Today, I would like to present on the experience and observations of the Port of Long Beach as it relates to this session's topic, ports, an opportunity to harmonize sustainable development of land and sea. The focus of my presentation will be on global port networks for sustainable development from a practical perspective. Let me begin by introducing you to the Port of Long Beach. The Port of Long Beach is located on the west coast of the United States and is the second busiest container seaport in North America. Each year, we handle more than $200 billion in cargo. Together with the Port of Los Angeles, the combined San Pedro Bay complex ranks as the 9th busiest port in the world, and we handle nearly 40% of the nation's imports. For calendar year 2021, we set new records for cargo volumes. In Long Beach, we surpassed the 9 million TEU mark for the first time in our history. As you can see on the slide, our container volumes have been on an upward trajectory since 2019, the year the U.S.-China trade war impacted our cargo volumes. By the middle of 2022, however, the historic demand triggered by the pandemic led to a historic cargo surge that catapulted us to a record year in 2020. And that same cargo surge led us to an even stronger year in 2021. Despite the challenges stemming from the global supply chain crisis, the San Pedro Bay complex handled 20 million TEU for the first time ever. Now for Long Beach, the 9.4 million TEU represents a year-over-year increase of nearly 16%. Imports were up 15%, while exports were down 2.6% year over year. On the right, you will see our cargo volumes by month, and you will notice that our inbound and outbound container volumes were fairly balanced. This is very important for the goods movement system. Now, port activity generates jobs and supports the local, state, and national economies. In the United States, goods movement is literally the economy in motion. Port activity and the maritime supply chain generate significant positive economic benefits to the national economy, including 31 million jobs per year, more than $5 trillion in total economic value, which accounts for more than a quarter of the nation's economy, and $378 billion in tax revenue. Now, during the pandemic, the Port of Long Beach also played a key role in our national response to COVID-19. We expedited containers carrying PPE and medical supplies, and we also opened a COVID test site, which administered over 27,000 tests in less than 6 months. In response to the Omicron variant, we recently reopened our COVID test site to give our waterfront workers every opportunity to get tested and help prevent the spread on the docks. We also started a vaccination program for seafarers. To date, we have vaccinated nearly 10,000 seafarers aboard the ships that call the San Pedro Bay complex. This is our way of ensuring that the global shipping community is given every opportunity to get vaccinated and stay safe. In addition to our response to COVID-19, we responded to the supply chain crisis caused by the pandemic. In the United States, the combination of historic demand for imports and tightened capacity created bottlenecks up and down the supply chain. In Long Beach, we formed a 24/7 task force to lead our response and recovery efforts. And one of the first actions we took was to activate 130 acres of vacant land for temporary container storage. This additional land provided immediate relief to our marine terminal operators and our supply chain stakeholders. With warehouse space running out of capacity and experiencing worker shortages, containers were piling up on the terminal and ships were queuing in record numbers right off the coast of Southern California. So we also added additional capacity equivalent to 1 million container units on an annualized basis with the completion of our new Long Beach container terminal, one of the greenest terminal operations in the world. Long Beach Container Terminal is a state-of-the-art facility that features some of the greenest and most advanced technologies in the world, including electric-powered zero-emissions cranes and cargo handling equipment. The 305-acre site has an annual capacity of 3.5 million TEU, making this terminal by itself the 6th largest port in North America. This terminal development is the latest example of our longstanding commitment to environmental stewardship and leadership. The Port of Long Beach is proud to be the first green port in the world. This goes back to the year our Board of Harbor Commissioners adopted our groundbreaking green port policy in the year 2005. The green port policy's guiding principles include protecting the community from harmful environmental impacts generated by port operations. It involves distinguishing the port as a leader in environmental stewardship and compliance, promoting sustainability. It also involves employing the best available technology to avoid or reduce environmental impacts, and engaging and educating the community. Our approach to sustainability is comprehensive and all-encompassing. In the area of wildlife, for example, we strive to protect, maintain, and restore aquatic ecosystems and marine habitats. With regard to air, our goal is to reduce harmful air emissions from port activities. For water, we want to improve the quality of Long Beach harbor waters. And for the area of soils and sediments, our goal is to remove, treat, or render suitable for beneficial reuse in contaminated soils and sediments in the harbor. On sustainability generally, we want to implement sustainable practices in design and construction, operations, and administrative practices throughout the port. And in the area of community engagement, it is our goal as an organization to interact with and educate the community regarding port operations and environmental programs. I am proud to report that the implementation of our green port policies and clean air action plan have produced dramatic improvements. Since 2005, we have seen an 88% reduction in diesel particulate matter, already surpassing the 2023 target of 77%. We also exceeded our 2023 target for sulfur oxides, which is down 97% from the baseline. And in the category of nitrogen oxides, we have seen a reduction of 58% and are 1 percentage point away from meeting our 2023 target set out in our Clean Air Action Plan with 1 year to go. I would note that these reductions in emissions were achieved during the same period that our cargo volumes increased 21%. This is a remarkable achievement that was made possible by the extraordinary collaboration of our industry partners, including the shipping lines, the marine terminal operators, and our trucking companies. But perhaps the most visible and impactful confirmation of our achievements on the sustainability front is a return of a vibrant marine habitat to our harbor. Today, the waters at the Port of Long Beach are blue, they're cleaner, and they support a thriving maritime and marine habitat. According to our updated biodiversity survey from April 2021, there are now 60% more species of plants and animals in our harbor compared to just a decade ago. In addition, fish and kelp are abundant, and it is not uncommon to see sea lions like the ones you see on the screen in the harbor. As much as we celebrate how far we have come, however, we also recognize that there is still more work to do. And in recognition of this, we updated our Cleaner Action Plan in 2017, setting new and bold goals for the San Pedro Bay Port Complex. Our 2017 Clean Air Action Plan update established the most aggressive goals yet: zero emissions. By 2030, for example, our goal is to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 40% compared with 1990 levels. We also want to reduce GHGs by 80% by 2050. Now, to get there, all cargo handling equipment in our terminals must be zero emissions by 2030. And by 2035, all trucks entering the port must be zero emissions vehicles. This is going to be a major transformation that will require strategic planning, significant investments, and unprecedented collaboration from our industry stakeholders. I am pleased to report that this transformation is well underway, as you will see on the following slides. Today, approximately 16% of all cargo handling equipment at the Port of Long Beach is zero emissions. And we are investing $160 million in projects to test zero and near zero emissions equipment, such as cargo handling equipment, charging stations, and a microgrid project. Half of this cost is being supported by state and federal government grants. We are also developing an electric vehicle blueprint funded by a state grant to evaluate electric infrastructure requirements. And on the following slides, you will see some examples of these projects. One of our container terminal operators at Pier J in Long Beach has repowered 9 rubber-tired gantry cranes, or RTGs, to be fully electric. This is an $8.8 million project. On this screen, you see Taylor battery electric top handlers at Pier J that will be used for the START project. START stands for Sustainable Terminals Accelerating Regional Transformation Project. The START project is the biggest of our zero emissions vehicles projects that also includes the participation of other ports in California. And these human-operated BYD yard hustlers that you see on the screen are being tested at our Pier G terminal. As you can see, we are well on our way to zero emissions cargo handling equipment. And our next bold initiative is zero emissions trucks by the year 2035. This is going to be a major transformation of the truck fleet that supports our port. This covers approximately 20,000 trucks. Now, one of the benefits of setting aggressive goals is that it incentivizes manufacturers to develop the technology. Already you see Tesla and other truck manufacturers announcing plans for electric and hydrogen fuel cell trucks. Of course, none of these goals could be achieved without the collaboration of our industry partners, the ocean carriers, terminal operators, and trucking companies, who have to be active participants. The same is true of the broader port ecosystem. In order to make a difference, other ports across the ocean and around the globe must step up. Our experience shows that ports play a pivotal role in facilitating the transformation to sustainable development. Now, this session focuses on SDG 14. Life Below Water focuses on the role of ports in sustainable development. Ports connect land and sea, and therefore help to harmonize the sustainable development of land and the ocean. The marine environment can be protected when land-based pollutants are prevented from entering sea, and ports can help with this effort. Ports are also important places that support maritime industry success, such as shipping, fishing, and the blue economy, which are illustrated in the following slide under SDG 14. SDG 14 strives to conserve and sustainably use the oceans, seas, and marine resources for sustainable development. This goal defines 10 targets to be achieved by 2030. The first 7 targets are outcome targets and focused on reducing marine pollution, protecting and restoring ecosystems, reducing ocean acidification, promoting sustainable fishing, conserving coastal marine areas, ending subsidies contributing to overfishing, and increasing the economic benefits from sustainable use of marine resources. The last 3 targets are means of achieving targets to increase scientific knowledge, research, and technology for ocean health, to support small-scale fishers, and implement and enforce international sea law. Global efforts such as these can be best supported by organizations and networks that bring ports together to exchange ideas and develop best practices. One such organization is the International Association of Ports and Harbors. IAPH represents port authorities across the globe and has taken a leadership role in the area of sustainability through its World Ports Sustainability Program. The World Port Sustainability Program was established to assist ports around the globe in applying the UN's 17 Sustainable Development Goals. The mission of the World Ports Sustainability Program is to demonstrate the global leadership of ports in contributing to the Sustainable Development Goals of the United Nations. The Port of Long Beach is proud to be a part of this effort. Port of Long Beach is also part of the Port Authority Roundtable, or PAR, a network of the world's leading port authorities. PAR was initiated by the Maritime and Port Authority of Singapore in 2015, with the aim to facilitate the exchange of ideas and best practices. This forum allows port authorities to engage in open dialogue and discussion to address issues of common interest and seek mutually beneficial opportunities for collaboration in today's evolving maritime landscape. For example, one of several initiatives that has been presented in a PAR forum is the Port of Antwerp's initiative to reduce carbon dioxide by 50% by 2030, as you will see on the next slide. The Port of Antwerp is working to become a climate neutral port. It strongly believes that CO2 capture, reuse, and storage for industry is an important weapon in the fight against global warming. To achieve this, the Port of Antwerp is teaming up with various partners in the energy and chemical industries to take practical steps in this direction. We also see other examples. The Getting to Zero Coalition, for example, has been very active in the global community to enlist the support of various entities to join them in pursuing a zero emissions future. Various ports, for example, have agreed to sign on to the Global Maritime Forum's call to action to decarbonize shipping. And there are many more examples of how ports around the globe are collaborating to address sustainable development. This is why forums like GEEF 2022 are so important. They bring the world together on one stage to address the most pressing and critical issues facing the global community. In conclusion, I would like to thank you for your attention. And again, I would like to extend my gratitude and appreciation to the organizers of GEEF 2022 for the kind invitation and for assembling this excellent forum in which we can exchange ideas, share our thoughts, our experiences, our perspectives, and come together as a global community to address these pressing and critical issues facing our world. The Port of Long Beach, on behalf of the Port of Long Beach, I thank you again for the invitation and look forward to hearing from my esteemed colleagues and experts and learning from their presentations as well. Global ports networks for sustainable development are key to our ability to come together and meet the SDGs that have been laid out by the United Nations. Thank you again for your kind attention and your kind invitation. Stay well.
네, 감사합니다.
Thank you very much for your presentation. Through the presentation, we were able to see the green port policies and clean air action at Long Beach Port. We could hear their successes of reducing air pollution as well as restoring ocean habitats. And we have also heard about how the global ports network can contribute to the achievement of UN SDGs. The World Sustainability Program, Getting to Zero Coalition, are just some of the types of cooperations that are ongoing. That brings us to the end of all three presentations.
Now we will have a panel discussion. I would first like to invite the two designated panel members for their discussions, and then I will invite the presenters for their additional comments. I'd like to invite the two panel discussants. Each of them will be given 10 minutes. First of all, we have with us Dr. Sukhui Lee. She is working as Deputy General Manager of Korea Marine Environment Management Corporation. She received her PhD from the University of Seoul, and she's going to offer some insights on these presentations. Please go ahead. As introduced, I am Sukhui Lee, working at the Korea Marine Environment Management Corporation. This corporation is responsible for studying marine environment, and we also pursue policies for the protection of the marine environment. And I'm in charge of climate and air quality related research. So I'm going to be discussing that. The first presentation was given by the Incheon Port Authority, and we were able to learn various policies and programs put in place by Incheon Port Authority for air quality management. It's been only in recent years when we paid attention to air quality because of the fine dust issues that we have had for the past several years. And we now have a separate law on air quality management for ports. I believe that this is a very important legislation because it is crucial to manage air quality around the ports. And as was mentioned by Vice President Kim, we need to pay attention to emissions from vessels and other facilities. As for ships and vessels, we already have some international regulations. And at the port authorities, there are various global networks. There may not be any enforcing mandates, but there are voluntary initiatives. However, when it comes to the road vehicles that connect between ports, I believe that there needs to be more connectivity and connection and integration between the port land transport and sea transport. As in the case of Long Beach Port, Clean Truck Program is a very encouraging initiative. And this Clean Truck initiative was quite successful in the U.S., but in Korea, there are not many restrictions or constraints placed on trucks that may cause air pollution. So such restrictions were not well enforced in Korea. And this is not something the ports can do or can control. So it requires local government and state government's effort in enforcing restrictions on the polluting trucks. And as for the loading and uploading and the offloading areas, yard tractors and cranes, there we already have some regulations, and many of these facilities have become electric. And in Incheon and Busan, I believe that the quality of facilities there is pretty good, and about 30% of these facilities are operating on electricity. And in the short term, in the next 5 years, I believe that most of the loading facilities will be operating on electricity. So such electrification is well underway. And I hope that various operators and stakeholders regarding the port operation will join in this initiative. But so far, the current regulations are mainly about air pollutants, switching from diesel to LNG, or to add some purification devices in the case of using diesel. But now we have the national initiative of achieving carbon neutrality by 2050, and this is also a global trend. And I believe that the ports are well aware of such global trends. So I think it is necessary for us to see more electric vehicles and hydrogen vehicles used at the ports. And Professor Taedong Lee discussed the global networks of ports. In the Western world, there are strong legal enforcements and various regulations in place. And I think that there is a very firm ground for environmental regulation. But when it comes to ports, only major ports in Korea participate in such global partnerships. So in this regard, I hope that there will be more common global standards that Korea will apply as well. For instance, AMP was introduced in the U.S. first, especially the California ports, including Long Beach. Vessels need to have AMP facility in place. But these vessels would travel around the world, and it means that the other ports need to have AMP facilities, and they need to be standardized because there may be differences in power output or voltage. So standardization has to be achieved. But we still have some shortcomings, both in Korea and in other countries, because AMP and other relevant facilities are not required, are not mandatory. So I believe that we need to have more global standards for such facilities. I enjoyed the presentation on Long Beach. As we do study on port air quality management, we refer to the cases and experiences of the Long Beach port. And what was interesting in this presentation was about policies to restore the marine ecosystem, because in the past, ports were only recognized and understood as spatial areas or places where logistical flow of goods will take place. But now, Long Beach Port has extended its scope of work to include measures to improve the ecosystem and the environment. Last year, Korea hosted an international event called P4G. Around the world, by 2030, countries have decided to designate more than 30% of the planet's surfaces as preservation areas. And I believe that this resolution is going to be adopted very soon. And there's global alliance pushed forward by the UK, and Korea has expressed its intention to join this initiative. But according to the existing laws, the protection area is only 20%, but Korea has decided to join this initiative. So we would have to revise the law to make sure that 30% of the areas will be designated as protection areas. In line with this trend, I hope that ports in Korea would study the cases of Long Beach, and I hope that Korean ports will also cater to protecting the marine environment as well. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Lee, for your discussion. She commented on Vice President Kim's presentation and various initiatives done by Incheon, and also there was a need for collaboration between the local government and the ports. And regarding Professor Lee's presentation, there are various voluntary initiatives, but she mentioned that we need more enforceable international standards and norms and rules. And it's not just the major ports, but also smaller ports that need to be joining in this force. And finally, about Mr. Noel's presentation, she said that she was impressed by how the Long Beach Port Authority is caring for the marine environment as well. And Korea is going to join in the Ocean Initiative, the global initiative. So this means that Korea would have to update and revise the laws and regulations in this regard.
Let us now go on to the second discussant. We have Dr. Hyongmo. Currently, he is at the Korea Maritime Institute, graduated from Lehigh University of the U.S. And through this session, Dr. Chun will share with us various measures related to ports and opportunity to harmonize sustainable development of land and sea. Good afternoon. As have been introduced, I am from KMI. KMI, let me briefly introduce our organization to you. It is a national research institute related to maritime studies, and we create various maritime policies. And related to ports, in Korea, ports have played a large part in economic development. For example, in Korea, we have a very high reliance on exports, and 99.7% of our logistics come through ports. And so without ports, we would not be able to have our economy. And so that is why from the 60s, we have continued to develop ports. And during the 60s, we have focused more on the economy rather than the environment. Incheon, Ulsan, Busan, and Gwangyang are the major ports in Korea, and they are surrounded by cities. And so as they are close to urban areas, in the past, these ports led urban development, but now, these days, these ports are deemed to be hazardous facilities because they create noise, air pollution, fine particles, dust that degrade the urban environment, and the ports prevents the urban citizens from enjoying the sea. And so ever since 2000, we have had different port policies, mostly green policies for ports. And so many parts of the ports are being improved. As you have heard about the equipment for loading and unloading, for the container terminals, 89% of the loading and unloading facilities have already gone green. And for ECA areas, we have a law related to air quality in these areas. And so we are going green much more quickly than expected. In 2021, the third basic framework for port development was kicked off, and revisions of this plan that is going into effect this year includes LNG-powered vessels. We are very much interested in LNG-powered bunkers, and so these bunkers actually provide fuel to the ships. In the past, we used high hazardous bunker fuels for ships, but now we are using LNG-powered bunkers. Well, that actually does not reduce CO2 emissions, but it actually reduces the emission of SOx and NOx. And so we would use LNG-powered vehicles and also fuel LNG to the major vessels as we used to use bunker fuels in the past. As Dr. Lee has provided a lot of information about ports, I would like to just add a point about Port Alliance. An alliance of ports is very important because for ports, ships are the guests. And if we regulate the port strictly, then the ships would not come to that port. They would lose their business. And so that is why we need to have a port alliance to have a similar level of restrictions and regulations so that we can make sure that we do not lose business to other ports. For Korea, we are in fierce competition with Chinese ports, and so American ports and European ports are obviously important for alliance, but we also need to work very closely with the Chinese ports. Up until now, I talked about how we need to respond to sustainability. In the past, we have turned hazardous ports into green ports, but now we need to take that a step further to make sure that the ports drive the development of the local areas. So in order to become carbon neutral by 2050, we need to have energy transformation. And at the center of that is hydrogen. And there are various types of hydrogen, gray hydrogen, blue hydrogen, and other types of hydrogen. For example, for gray hydrogen, we have the emission of carbon dioxide. Blue hydrogen means that we capture carbon in that process. And we also have green hydrogen, which means that we are producing hydrogen using electricity from renewable energy. And so if we take a look at the current Korean situation, it would be very difficult for us to have sufficient amounts of green hydrogen. And so what we need to do is to import green hydrogen produced from renewable energy from the Middle East and other areas. And that is why the role of ports will become even more important. So in the future, ports will be the gateway to import green hydrogen and also to create blue hydrogen, because ports will be the area where we store hydrogen and distribute hydrogen. And that is why we are also planning to have hydrogen ports. And this is something that is ongoing in Europe. In Rotterdam, we have seen that there is a lot of renewable energy that is being used and also hydrogen used at ports. And not only in Europe, not only in the Netherlands, we see that there are also distribution pipelines that are being created to utilize hydrogen. The Energy Department in the U.S. is also making plans to utilize hydrogen through the ports. And so we need to make sure that we make a lot of efforts to lay down the foundation to create ports that can utilize hydrogen. Thank you very much for your opinion. In Korea, ports were at the center of economic development, but we have renewed recognition about the importance of environment. And so that is why, in order to make our ports green, we have switched to green equipment for loading and unloading, in fact, above 89%. And when we regulate these ports, we can make them greener. But if we have ports making individual regulations, then they can lose out on business. And that is why Port Alliance is very important. And last but not least, he mentioned that ports need to lead the way for sustainability in the future, such as being the gateway for hydrogen. So we have listened to our two designated discussants, and we have two speakers here on site, and we will be going back to our speakers for their comments. We will go to Vice President Jong-Gil first. Thank you very much for your discussion. I could really relate to the two discussants, and so I do not have any comments concerning the comments themselves, but Dr. Lee talked about not only ships, but also freight vehicles. And so we need to collaborate with the port authorities as well as the manufacturers. This is something that we also conducted by starting a working group with the car manufacturers last year. And as we have seen in the Long Beach port example, we can see that they are quite leading in their changes. Well, as Noel has mentioned, through the Clean Truck program, they hope to switch to clean trucks, all clean trucks by 2030. This is something that we have to discuss with the car manufacturers as well. So we started our working group last year. As I mentioned before, we hope to upgrade our efforts. Globus is a company that has started e-trucks, And so whether it be Hyundai Motors or other automotive manufacturers, we will continue our collaboration so that we can utilize clean trucks within Korean ports as well. We need to also work with the local autonomies, and we look forward to incentives being provided for Korean trucks within the ports so it could propel the transformation. We could see the great example of Long Beach, and they are already working on protecting the air quality, the water quality, and the habitat. I believe that that is probably because of the difference in the role of the port authorities in the U.S. and Korea. But we could see that there are efforts made in Long Beach to manage the air quality and the water quality. In Korea, we are more focused on air quality, but we could see the frequent viewings of sea lions in Long Beach. Ever since a few years ago, Incheon Port Authority came up with an environmental department for the first time for any port authority in Korea. And the budget for that department continues to increase. Of course, budget and organization are always the most important in the beginning. But we still have a long way to go. And given the U.S. example, we really do have a long way to go. We have also heard from Dr. Jeon of KMI. And a keyword that he mentioned is that ports need to lead sustainability. And through port alliances, we need to work with sustainability along with other ports around the world. That really was a key message that I could really relate to. And through this forum, this was a great learning opportunity for me. And I jotted down some ideas so that I can apply that to our port when I go back to my office. And so I will do my best to create Incheon Port into a sustainable port. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your comments. I would now like to invite Professor Lee. I really appreciated the comments provided by the two panel members. I learned a lot. When you think about ports, there are many ports around the world and in Korea, and they connect between the land and the oceans, so they play a very important role. And when it comes to carbon neutrality, ports can play a bigger part in achieving carbon neutrality in the future. So this is what I thought in my mind, and what would need to be happening to achieve that. First of all, we need to put in place the relevant laws and regulations and also the organizations, but also we need to have good manpower. People are crucial because we should be able to create green jobs at the ports so that there will be sustainable employment. And we should also have people, human resources, who are able to analyze data from the external authorities and institutions. And we need people who would network with members of the ports in other countries. And we need people who can do study and research to understand how we can maintain competitiveness of the Korean ports vis-a-vis other ports, for instance, in China. It means that we need to recruit talented individuals and offer them green jobs. There are many young people who are struggling to find jobs, and I hope that ports can hire them, these talented individuals, and utilize these human resources for such activities. And also in doing so, we can contribute to the local economy. So far, we focused on air quality management and reducing air pollutants, and of course SOx and NOx and fine particles in the air. There has been a shift in such areas, but I think we need to go even further. We need to understand what environmental issues we can address at the ports so that we can not only include air quality management and water quality management, but also ecosystem restoration and protection. And to do so, we need to collaborate. We need to work with the local governments, the citizens, and the local research institutes and other stakeholders. And when we collaborate and work together with these various actors, we can produce better results and we can promote sustainability of ports. Thank you very much for your comments.
세 분의
So we have heard from 2 discussants and 3 presenters. For the last 90 minutes, we have discussed ports and opportunity to harmonize sustainable development of land and sea. Having listened to all 5 panelists, I could see the opportunity indeed of utilizing ports to achieve SDGs. So it was indeed a learning opportunity for all of us. Above all, by connecting land, sea, people, habitats, and cities, we can see that many stakeholders need to come together in order to make sustainable ports. We also need to have a portfolio of policies and strategies to achieve our goals together. I do hope that our session could make our contribution to achieving SDGs through ports. This brings us to the end of the session. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you, Professor Kim and distinguished panelists, for your rich discussion on the initiatives taken by port authorities to make the ports greener in terms of land, air, and sea. Listening to you, I realize that achieving SDGs while remaining competitive seems to be a Herculean task. And I do hope that global standards, as you said, will emerge to facilitate such initiatives. Thank you.